They found him in the quietude beneath broken beams and crumbling sheetrock, in a place untouched by warmth for years. The floor was slick with mold, the walls gnawed by time, and in the corner of what was once a child's bedroom, behind a stained mattress, a crate was wedged like an afterthought. No food, no water, no sound, just the faint shiver of breath. When Officer Delaney pried open the rusted latch, the dog inside didn't move. His eyes, a dull amber smudged with sorrow, blinked once but didn't look away. He was bone-thin, fur-matted, a raw scar slicing from shoulder to elbow, half-healed and ugly. He didn't flinch when they spoke or growl when they reached in. He simply waited, the way animals do when they've run out of reasons to hope. They called him Echo, though no one was sure who named him first. Maybe it was the way he moved, quiet and almost invisible, or perhaps it was just the way he existed, not quite part of the world around him. The vet said he was 2, maybe 3, though the stiffness in his limbs said older. Trauma ages dogs differently sometimes. They age overnight. Back at Havenwood Harbor Animal Shelter, the staff gave him space, a kennel at the far end of the isolation wing, away from the barking and the light. For the first few days, he didn't eat, not when bowls were left inside, not when volunteers sat near him and whispered soft words meant to sound like comfort. When they tried to bring him out for a walk, he went limp, body heavy as wet rope. He didn't resist, but he didn't live either. By the end of the second week, his kennel card had been updated with 2 bold red words: Unadoptable, case. It wasn't cruelty. It was protocol. There were only so many volunteers, only so many kennels, and too many dogs with better odds, ones who wagged their tails, licked fingers through bars, ones who hadn't shut the door inside their own minds. Liam Walker wasn't supposed to be there that day. His mom had stopped by the shelter to drop off blankets from the hospital, and he'd wandered behind her out of habit. He knew the place well. Havenwood wasn't big, and the shelter staff knew him by name. Most 12-year-olds didn't spend afternoons sketching sleeping dogs or reading aloud to skittish rescues, but Liam wasn't most kids. He was drawn to the far end of the hallway where the kennels grew quieter, the energy more fragile. He passed yapping terriers, tail-wagging mutts, wide-eyed puppies. Then he reached the last one. The dog didn't bark, didn't move, didn't blink. It was the stillness that stopped Liam cold, the kind of stillness that didn't belong to sleep, but to something else, something hollow, something finished. He crouched slowly, careful not to let his backpack thud against the concrete. Inside the kennel, the dog lay curled in the farthest corner, ribs showing under dirty fur, eyes fixed on nothing. He looked more like ash than an animal, like someone had poured the idea of a dog into a mold and then forgotten it. A volunteer appeared beside Liam, voice gentle. "That's Echo. We don't let people in with him. He doesn't tolerate contact." "What happened to him?" Liam asked. "Picked up in an abandoned house out near the marsh. Nobody knows how long he was there, but judging by his weight and the damage on that leg, too long." Liam didn't speak. He just nodded, still crouched, still watching. When his mom called, he lingered a second longer before following her out. That night, he couldn't shake the image. It sat with him through dinner, through homework, through brushing his teeth. Daisy, his family's elderly Labrador, nudged his arm, sensing the unease, but Liam couldn't explain it. It wasn't sadness. It wasn't even pity. It was recognition, like somehow he knew that look Echo had worn, not because he'd lived it, but because he understood what it meant to feel small, forgotten, tucked into the edges of a room no one noticed. The next afternoon, he returned. He didn't ask permission. He just walked straight down the hallway and sat in front of Echo's kennel, cross-legged on the floor, a dog-eared paperback tucked under his arm and a half sandwich in his jacket pocket. He didn't speak right away, just breathed, let the silence settle around them both like dust. Then he opened the book. His voice was quiet, not performative, the kind of voice used for secrets and lullabies. He didn't read anything dramatic, just a chapter about a boy and a spaceship and the mistakes that made them both feel more human. He read for 10 minutes, then 15, then closed the book and placed the sandwich, torn into small pieces, halfway, between himself and the gate. Echo didn't move, not once. But Liam came back the next day, and the next, always with a story, always with a sandwich, always sitting, never reaching. On the fourth day, Echo lifted his head when Liam sat down. On the sixth, his ears twitched. By the eighth, one piece of the sandwich was gone when Liam returned. He didn't cheer, didn't smile too wide, just sat and read and left the food. Then, on the 10th day, Echo moved. It was small, deliberate, the slow drag of a paw forward, belly low to the ground, eyes never leaving the boy. He reached the sandwich piece, took it gently, then retreated to the corner. He didn't shake, didn't growl. He chose. Later that evening, Liam stood in the kitchen and made his announcement. I want to foster him. His father looked up from the paper. Foster who? Echo, the dog from the shelter. Thomas raised an eyebrow. The one they said can't be adopted? He can. He just needs more time than the others. And you think we're the ones to give it to him? I think I'm the one, Liam said quietly. Maggie, drying her hands at the sink, looked from her son to her husband. We could try just a few weeks, see how it goes. Thomas hesitated, then exhaled. All right, but he stays in the laundry room, and you're responsible. Liam nodded. That Friday, Echo came home. He didn't bark, didn't whine, didn't try to run. He stepped into the back of the SUV and lay down like he expected nothing. The laundry room was ready. A soft bed, a quiet corner, bowls, toys, and a blanket that smelled like home. Liam sat nearby, not inside the room, just close enough for Echo to know he was there. Daisy padded in and dropped an old tennis ball near the door, then lay down, tail thumping once. Echo stayed curled up, but his eyes opened, and for the first time since they found him in the wreckage of that broken house, they stayed open just a little longer. For the first 3 days, Echo didn't leave the corner of the laundry room. He lay curled tight, his body pressed against the wall like he was trying to vanish into it, as if the world might forget he was there if he just stayed still enough. The food disappeared slowly, never when anyone was watching. But the water bowl was always half empty by morning. He made no sound, not even when Daisy ambled in with her soft old limbs and dropped a squeaky toy near his bed. She'd nudged the toy once, then sat beside the threshold, facing him but not pushing. She'd always been a dog who understood patience, and Echo seemed to recognize that somehow. He didn't retreat further when she came. He just watched her through the thick fog of his fear. Liam never tried to pet him. He read books in the hallway, left little pieces of banana in his palm and let them sit untouched, told him about his day at school, about how Mrs. Whitaker had called on him even though he wasn't raising his hand, about how his friend Max was obsessed with aliens and thought the school lunch meatloaf was actually government-issued space food. Echo never reacted to any of it, but Liam kept talking anyway. It was easier than silence, and somewhere deep down, he knew the dog was listening, even if he didn't want to. On the 5th day, Maggie found Liam asleep on the laundry room floor, his back against the washer, a book still in his lap. Echo hadn't moved, but his eyes had stayed open longer. When Maggie gently stirred her son, the dog didn't look away. That was enough to make her pause. She stood there a long time before, brushing a hand through Liam's hair and whispering, "He's watching, honey. That means something." The turning point came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. The storm had rolled in fast, casting Havenwood in a heavy gray that smelled of salt and pine. The lights flickered once in the kitchen, and thunder cracked somewhere, just over the hills. Daisy, unbothered, climbed onto the rug near the fireplace and snored with her chin tucked over one paw. But Echo, he trembled. Liam noticed it first, the faint vibration in the bowl of water, the twitch of muscles under damp fur. He didn't say anything, just sat a little closer, slid the blanket from the hallway, into the room, inch by inch. He didn't look directly at Echo, just let it be there, a quiet offering. Later that night, Thomas stood in the doorway, watching his son talk softly to a dog that still wouldn't let him touch it, and he said nothing either. There was a flicker of something in his face. Worry, maybe, or just the unfamiliar ache of watching hope stretch itself across weeks of silence. "Still hasn't come out once," he murmured to Maggie as they got ready for bed. "Not even for the back door." "He will," she said without looking up from folding towels. "He's trying, just not in the way we expect." The next morning there was a muddy paw print near the door. It was small, almost smudged away in the folds of the entryway rug, but it hadn't been there before. Liam stared at it like it was a map to something sacred. He knelt beside it, finger tracing the edge where claws had pressed into soft fabric. Daisy sniffed at once and gave a single approving wag of her tail. That afternoon, Echo emerged for the first time. It wasn't graceful. He crept like a ghost, body low, eyes darting to every corner of the hallway, flinching at the sound of Liam dropping a pencil, freezing when Maggie laughed too loudly at the TV. But he came. He padded 3 feet out of the laundry room, sniffed Daisy's discarded toy, and lay down halfway behind a chair. Liam didn't call out or praise him. He just placed a small piece of chicken on the floor far enough away to make it a decision and then returned to his seat on the stairs. 10 minutes later, the chicken was gone. Echo hadn't moved an inch otherwise, but it was progress. Measured, hesitant, precious progress. At school, Liam had been assigned a project for his English class: change and growth. Most kids chose sports they'd tried or goals they wanted to reach by summer. Liam asked if he could write about Echo. "I don't know if it'll have a happy ending yet," he told his teacher. "Doesn't have to," Mr. Anders replied. "Growth isn't always pretty." So Liam brought in pictures. One of Echo curled up in the shelter, one of him peeking out from the laundry room doorway, and one taken just the day before. Echo standing at the back window, sunlight glinting off the scar on his leg, ears perked, eyes alert. Not joyful, not yet, but awake. He stood in front of the class and talked about fear, about how some dogs don't bark or bite when they're scared. They just stop. How silence can be just as loud as a growl. He said Echo wasn't mean. He was tired, and tired dogs needed time, not punishment. When he sat down, the room was quiet. One of the girls in the back, the one who rarely talked to anyone, raised her hand and asked, "What's his name again?" "Echo," Liam said. "I like that," she murmured. "It sounds brave." At home, Echo had begun to follow Daisy outside, not every time and not for long, but enough that the crunch of gravel beneath his paws became more familiar. He sniffed the garden bed, watched birds dart between the branches of the oak tree, flinched when a garbage truck rumbled by, but didn't run. He came back inside on his own. Maggie started to joke that Daisy had become a furry therapist, dropping her toys near Echo like a breadcrumb trail back to trust. Thomas still kept his distance, unsure of how to bridge the quiet, but even he had begun to notice the way Echo's ears perked when Liam walked into the room, how his body relaxed just slightly when Liam sat nearby with a book. One night after dinner, Liam knelt beside the couch where Echo was lying, not asleep, but not tense either, and gently placed his hand near the dog's shoulder. He didn't press, just rested it there in silence. Echo leaned. It was the barest shift, a quiet gravity, the kind that couldn't be taught or earned quickly. It happened slowly, like thaw. That weekend, the Walker family filed the adoption papers. The shelter staff cried a little when they heard. Echo's file, once stamped with Unadoptable, now bore a new note in black ink. Adopted. Special case. Keep updated. On the way home from the shelter, Liam sat in the back with his hand resting gently on Echo's back. Daisy curled at his feet. "You're not a project," he whispered into the quiet hum of the road. "You're part of us now." Echo didn't look back. He didn't have to. Echo's first bark came not with a growl or panic, but during a Saturday morning so ordinary it could have slipped past unnoticed. Maggie was flipping pancakes in the kitchen, the scent of cinnamon and butter thickening the air, while Daisy circled the table in her lazy, habitual loop, hoping for a drop to scrap. Liam sat at the counter, recounting a story from school about a science experiment gone wrong. The sun filtered in through the window, cutting across the tile floor like a warm spotlight. Echo lay curled in the corner by the back door, half asleep, half aware, his eyes quietly following the movement in the room. The sharp bark that cracked the air was enough to stop everyone mid-motion. Maggie nearly dropped the spatula. Liam froze mid-sentence. Thomas looked up from the newspaper with furrowed brows. And Echo, wide-eyed and slightly startled himself, blinked as if surprised by his own voice. A moment later he barked again, softer this time, like he was testing it, tasting the sound in his mouth. He didn't flinch. Instead, his ears perked, his body relaxed slightly, and for a fleeting moment, he looked almost proud. Daisy patted over and nudged him, tail wagging like she understood what it meant. Echo had spoken, not in words, but in a language of the living. After that, things shifted in subtle but important ways. Liam, encouraged by the bark, started working with Echo on leash training. At first, the moment the leash clipped on, Echo would freeze, his muscles locked like he was bracing for something. So Liam started small. They sat together on the porch, the leash lying beside them untouched, while Liam read aloud from his newest book or told Echo about his day. Over time, Echo stopped watching the leash like a threat. He sniffed it, nudged it. One afternoon, with the leash lying across Liam's lap, Echo took a step forward and gently pressed his nose into Liam's hand. That was enough. A week later, they took their first real walk. Daisy led the way, her old legs steady but slower now, and Echo followed beside Liam, cautious but not resisting. His steps were hesitant, but each one felt earned. A neighbor passed and waved, and when she glanced down at Echo, her face lit up with recognition. "Is that the same dog from the shelter?" she asked. Liam nodded. "That's Echo." From then on, Echo wasn't just a project or a miracle in progress. He was Liam's companion. The leash became a routine, then second nature. Walks turned from tentative steps into quiet strolls through the neighborhood, and when they passed Havenwood Harbor, Echo no longer stiffened or looked away. He simply walked by, tail low but relaxed. At school, Liam's class was working on a project about change. Some kids brought in plants they'd nurtured. Others talked about grades or sports or learning to ride a bike. Liam asked Mr. Carlson if he could present Echo's story. Mr. Carlson, curious but cautious, agreed. Liam created a poster board with photos. Echo curled in the kennel, then curled on a couch. Echo flinching from touch, then gently taking a treat from Maggie's hand. Beneath the images were captions. Day 1, silent. Week 2, first tail wag. Month 1, leash walk. When presentation day came, Liam stood before his class, his voice steady. He didn't dramatize. He simply told them about a dog who had been afraid, who had been labeled unadoptable, who had learned slowly, stubbornly to trust again. When he finished, the room was quiet. Then Tyler, a boy who usually spent more time drawing than listening, muttered, "He looks kinda cool now, not scary at all." Maggie and Thomas were there in the back of the classroom, watching with something unspoken in their expressions, something like pride, maybe even awe. That night, Liam began writing in a notebook his mom had given him. Not a diary exactly, but a journal. He filled the first page with Echo's name and the word, "Started healing." The second entry came the next day. Echo played with Daisy's tennis ball. The third followed soon after. Echo let Maggie pet him while she sang around this time. Havenwood Harbor hosted its seasonal adoption fair, and Linda, the head volunteer, called and asked if Liam and Echo would attend. Not for adoption, of course, she said quickly, but as a story, as proof of what's possible. Liam hesitated. "He's not great with crowds. We'll give him space," she promised. "Just a quiet corner, booth style and open so they can see him." So they went. A small fenced area with a canopy was set up near the edge of the park. Echo lay beneath it, watchful but calm, while Liam sat beside him with a stack of printed photos and a poster board labeled Echo's Journey. Daisy, ever the ambassador, lay sprawled near the edge, tail wagging lazily. A family approached, a mother, a father, and a young girl with a book tucked under her arm. The girl knelt quietly, eyes wide. Echo's ears twitched, but he didn't back away. He stayed still, observing. The girl didn't try to pet him. Instead, she began to read softly, a story about a lost fox and the friends he had made. Echo stayed where he was, eyes half closed, his breathing even. Afterward, the mother leaned down and said, "My daughter rarely speaks to people, but she reads to dogs. She likes the ones who listen." After the event, Linda told Liam 3 fearful dogs had received applications. "People saw Echo," she said, "and understood that change is possible." Liam added another entry to the journal that night. Day 97. Echo helped someone else. It was the beginning of something bigger than either of them knew. Not just healing, not just progress, but something that echoed in the quiet space between fear and trust. The space where a dog once written off had found his voice, and more importantly, had learned when to use it. The call came on a gray afternoon, just as Havenwood was beginning to slip into its winter hush. The rain had softened the roads into wet ribbons, and the waves outside the walker's window churned restlessly, echoing the tension that had begun to build within their home. Maggie answered the shelter's line, her voice rising slightly with surprise before settling into something more careful, measured. When she hung up, she glanced toward the back door where Echo lay curled beside Daisy. She told Liam gently. Someone had come to the shelter, an older man. Said he might have known Echo, said the scar on the dog's shoulder, the slight limp, the way he flinched from raised voices. He remembered all of it. Said the dog had once been his. Liam didn't say anything at first. He just looked at Echo. And Echo, as if sensing the shift in the air, lifted his head slowly and met Liam's eyes. For the rest of the day, no one brought it up again, but the weight of the coming choice sat thick in the room like fog that refused to lift. They agreed to meet at the park near the edge of town, neutral ground, open and quiet. When Ray arrived, he looked nothing like Liam expected. His coat was patched and frayed at the seams, his hands weathered and cracked like driftwood, but there was nothing threatening in his presence, only the kind of sadness that's grown old from carrying itself too long. When he saw Echo, he didn't reach out. He dropped to one knee in the wet grass and whispered, "Hey, buddy, it's been a while." Echo didn't move at first. His body stayed low, tense, eyes watching every twitch of the man's fingers. Then, after a long moment, he stepped forward slowly, not in greeting, but in memory. He sniffed the air, the man's boots, the familiar scent buried beneath layers of time, and then, without warning, he stepped back. Ray sat down fully, legs crossed, letting the rain soak into his jeans. He spoke quietly, not to the people watching, but to the dog who'd once followed him through alleyways and over train tracks, who'd slept curled beside him in nights so cold they couldn't feel their toes. He told the story, and the words fell not like confessions but like pages being turned on a book no one had ever read aloud before. After Ray's wife died, everything had fallen apart. The job went, the house followed. Then came the nights and shelters, the borrowed couches, the long walks with nowhere to go. Echo, he was rusty then, had been his only constant until one day, in desperation, Ray left him with someone he thought he could trust while chasing a job lead 3 towns away. When he returned, Echo was gone. The man said he ran off. Ray searched, for weeks following shelter leads and vague sightings until they dried up, until he gave up. Echo, for his part, had been picked up weeks later by a local rescue team near the edge of a construction site. He was underweight, with old rope marks around his hind legs and a haunted look in his eyes that lingered long after the bruises healed. The shelter staff had guessed the abuse came after he'd been lost. Teenagers, maybe. Kids with nothing to do and too much cruelty in their hands. He'd learned not to bark, not to growl, just to shrink into corners and disappear. As Ray finished his story, Echo stood a few feet away, his posture uncertain. Liam knelt beside him, not touching, just waiting. Ray looked at them both and said simply, "I understand if you don't want to let him go. I wouldn't either. I needed him to know I didn't leave him on purpose." The choice wasn't made then. It wasn't loud. It wasn't clear. But that evening back home, as Echo curled on his blanket beside Daisy and Liam sat cross-legged nearby with his journal open, something shifted. When Maggie asked gently what they should do, Liam only said, he already chose. Over the next week, Ray came by a few more times, not to take Echo but to walk with him, to sit quietly on the porch, to let him listen. Echo, slowly, cautiously, led him. Echo was no longer the dog who flinched at every movement. He was the dog who walked beside Liam at therapy visits now, who sat calmly in rooms full of whispering voices and nervous hands. One afternoon at the community center, a little boy with a history of night terrors curled against Echo's side and fell asleep. The boy's mother had watched in disbelief. Later, she told Liam that Echo had done more in 20 minutes than months of therapy had managed. Echo didn't wag or bark or lick, he just stayed present steady. That was enough. The town began to notice. Echo wasn't just the dog with the scar anymore. He was the one who waited beside anxious children in reading circles, the one who let lonely hands rest on his fur for comfort. He had become not just a pet, not just a survivor, but a guide. Quiet and constant through the fragile places people didn't have words for. At home, Liam continued to write his journal, now thick with entries that mapped not just Echo's growth but their own. Maggie's laughter when Echo let her dress him in a superhero cape, Thomas repairing the fence with Echo sprawled beside him, Maggie making space in the pantry for a row of dog treats labeled Echo's shelf. And though Ray never asked again, he came by now and then, sometimes bringing a new chew toy or sitting out back while Liam tossed tennis balls. Echo never ran far, but he always brought them back. He always came home. It wasn't that Echo forgot his past, it was that he'd finally learned the past didn't get to decide where he belonged. That was his choice now, and he had made it. Spring crept into Havenwood with a hush that seemed fitting. The gray, damp skies of February slowly peeled away into clearer light, and the breeze from the ocean carried the kind of stillness that made you want to sit down and just breathe. At the Walker house, life moved with a gentle rhythm. Daisy, older now, moved slower, spending more time sunbathing by the window than circling the table. Echo had grown into something quieter too, not out of fear, but in the way someone who has seen too much learns to treasure the calm. Liam was the first to notice the new arrival at Havenwood Harbor, a young German shepherd brought in after being found tied to a park bench during a thunderstorm, drenched and shaking, his body all limbs and nerves. His name, scrolled on the intake form in rushed handwriting, was Timber. He didn't bark or growl, but the moment someone stepped close, he would press himself into the farthest corner of the kennel, trembling so hard it seemed his bones might crack. Liam saw it all with the kind of recognition that didn't need explaining. He looked at Echo, and Echo looked back. By that weekend, Timber was sleeping in the old laundry room. It wasn't a rescue mission. It wasn't charity. It was a passing of the torch. Echo didn't try to comfort Timber, didn't crowd him with affection. He just lay near the threshold, far enough not to intrude, close enough to be felt. Liam and Maggie kept things quiet and slow, treats left beside untouched food bowls, open doors, soft words, and Daisy, even in her old age, nudged a toy into the laundry room with a patient, tired paw. The first time Timber stepped out on his own, Echo didn't so much as flick an ear. The first time Timber let Liam touch his shoulder, Echo blinked slowly and shifted just enough to let the warmth of the room pull Timber closer. Healing isn't a thunderclap. It's a ripple. Timber began to follow Echo around the house, mimicking his slow steps, curling up just a foot behind him during naps, even letting Maggie sneak him bits of toast under the table. The leash was a challenge, as it had once been with Echo, but now Liam had a partner. When Timber froze, Echo stood still too. When Timber darted back toward the porch, Echo waited. It was Maggie who said it first, watching the two of them move like twin shadows through the yard. He's teaching Timber how to be brave. They returned to the therapy program quietly without announcement. Echo wore his vest like an old soldier, slipping back into uniform, and Timber walked beside him, uncertain but steady. In the children's center, Echo curled into his usual place near the reading mat. Timber stayed close to the wall, but stayed. One boy, anxious and withdrawn, sat down and began to read aloud. His voice stammered, then strengthened. Echo's ears flicked. Timber crept forward one paw at a time and lay down beside him. That night, Liam wrote, Timber listened today, really listened. Daisy passed in early summer. One morning, she simply didn't get up from her spot beneath the window. They buried her in the yard under the tree she used to bark at squirrels from. Maggie cried. Thomas dug the hole himself. Liam and Maggie placed her favorite toy on the grass. Echo sat beside the grave, unmoving for a long time. For a while after, the house felt off balance. But grief, like healing, doesn't arrive all at once. It comes in waves and leaves space behind. When the invitation came from the National Animal Therapy Conference, it felt like the closing of a circle. They wanted Echo to attend, not to demonstrate tricks or obedience, just to be there, just to represent what healing looks like when it chooses to stay. Liam went with him, presenting their story before rows of trainers, counselors, educators. He spoke of fear, trust, and the quiet courage of presence. When it ended, he looked down and found Echo resting calmly at his feet. Timber curled beside him, eyes closed, heartbeat steady. There was a standing ovation, but neither dog stirred. Not long after, Echo began to slow. It was subtle at first, a longer nap, a missed step on the porch. Then came the stiffness, the harder mornings. Dr. Jensen, their vet, was gentle and honest. Echo was aging. No pain, just time catching up. He still insisted on his therapy, work, even if for shorter sessions. Timber took on more, but wherever Timber went, Echo followed, even if it meant arriving later, resting sooner. Then one morning, Echo didn't rise. He lay on his bed, breathing slow and deep. Liam sat beside him, just like he had that first week back at the shelter. No big speeches, just presence. Maggie brought his blanket. Maggie tucked in his favorite toy. Thomas knelt beside him, hand resting on the old dog's chest. Echo lifted his head once, eyes landing on Timber, then Liam, and then he rested it down. They buried him beside Daisy. Liam didn't write in his journal that night. Instead, he opened a new one. On the first page, in neat, careful handwriting, he wrote, "This one is for Timber and all the others who sit beside us. Because Echo showed us how, and the fire he lit never went out."